Welcome friends, it's Miss Gisa, and I have a story based on Andy Warhol's life written by his nephew called Uncle Andy's. Written by James Warhola. A Fabulous Visit with Andy Warhol. Here it starts with an author's note. Paul Warhola was the eldest of three brothers who grew up in the smoky industrial city of Pittsburgh. He and his wife Anne moved to the country to raise their 7 children. He loved his junk business, which allowed him to be his own boss and choose his own hours. Life in the countryside was far from easy, but for us kids, we had a wonderful, carefree existence. Paul's younger brother, Andy, left Pittsburgh for New York City in 1949 and soon dropped the A from his name for artists who believed that they could stretch the limits of art even more by portraying ordinary things that were popular to modern society. It quickly became known as pop art. Every few months, we made a pilgrimage to New York City to visit our Uncle Andy and our grandmother, whom we affectionately referred to as Baba, a Russian word meaning grandmother. As the trips progressed through the 1950s, there became more of us, and our car acquired a caravan quality. As kids, we looked forward to each trip as a great adventure to a very exotic land. A land apart from ours, where people dyed their hair purple and walked herds of dogs through the streets. Our oasis was Uncle Andy's and Bubba's house. The following story is a trip that we took in August of 1962. It was a very important year for Andy Warhol. He had his first solo exhibition in which he introduced the world to his soup can paintings. Though he had achieved great prominence in the art world, we will always remember him as our Uncle Andy. Looking back on those days, the one thing I remember most is thinking my dad had the best darn job in the world. Our yard was always so much more fun than anyone else's in the neighborhood. My oldest brother was already away at college, but there were still 6 of us at home. Dad had lots of jobs, but for now, he was mostly a junk man. Sometimes the neighbors complained that our yard looked like a junkyard. The real junkyard was about a mile away on a dirt road. It was up a really steep hill. It had everything: old cars, old pop machines, and old airplane engines. You name it, it was there on the hill. Dad's job was to take things apart and separate the metals: aluminum, copper, brass, and steel. When there were enough, he loaded the truck and hauled it to another junkyard. Dad was always bringing home junk, and sometimes he'd say to me, "Now Jamie, this can really make good art." Then he'd put a bunch of it together in an interesting way. Mom was always yelling to Dad, "For Pete's sake, Paul, quit junking up the house." And, "Paul, when are you going to get rid of this stuff anyhow?" But we liked playing in the junk. One day, Dad came home from work and announced, "It's time to visit Bubba and Uncle Andy in the big city. We'll leave tomorrow morning." Oh, we were so excited. It was not often that we got to visit our grandma and our famous artist uncle in New York City. We had a lot of getting ready to do. Dad had work to do on the car. Mary Lou and Eva had to make sandwiches. Georgie and I had to pack the car. And little Maddie and Marty, well, they didn't do much. They were just in the way. The next morning, Mom woke us up extra early, and we were finally on our way. We saw nothing but cornfields and cow pastures at first. Then, slowly, counted the 7 tunnels that it would take us to get there. When we came to the last tunnel, we all perked up. All of a sudden, the world became very different. There were giant buildings, honking taxis, and people going every which way. Dad slowly wove his way uptown to Uncle Andy's. There we were, all 8 of us standing in front of a huge black door, ringing the doorbell. After a long wait, the door unlatched and slowly opened. Uncle Andy peered out for a minute and then let out a, "Oh!" Dad always thought it was best not to phone ahead so that it would be a surprise. It certainly worked. Uncle Andy was always very, very surprised. He showed us in and we made our way to the kitchen where our grandmother was. Bubba drowned us with wet kisses, as she always did, and fixed us a dinner of salamis, breads, and cheeses. Soon, all the chattering and eating came to an end, and it was time for sleep. Uncle Andy showed us to our makeshift beds. I slept on the floor, on a propped-up old door covered with cushions. In the morning, I noticed that I was surrounded by towers of soup boxes. I thought Uncle Andy and Bubba sure ate a lot of soup, but that wasn't it at all. Uncle Andy didn't buy those soup boxes. He built them out of wood and painted each one. They were art, and really important too, because Uncle Andy told us not to touch any of it. Dad always remembered to bring Uncle Andy something interesting from the junkyard. This time, it was a giant magnet with a bunch of bolts stuck to it. Uncle Andy peered over his glasses at it real carefully, and after a pause he said, "Oh, gee, wow!" Then we really knew he liked it. He decided that it should go right by the front door. Uncle Andy had 25 cats, all named Sam. They were always hiding in a house that was just like a giant amusement park. It was perfect for hide-and-go-seek and racing. It wasn't long before the 6 of us were flying up and down stairs and through all the rooms like a band of wild monkeys. Uncle Andy thought everything was art in some way or another. That's why his house was so fantastic. Each of the rooms was filled to the brim with all sorts of neat things. There were always new things to see. Right in the middle of the entranceway, there was a giant piece of crumpled metal. It looked like it might have gotten stuck there and couldn't go any further. Uncle Andy explained to us, "Oh, that's a piece of fabulous art by a famous artist." We were impressed. Dad had a lot of that back home. Uncle Andy was always making art. We loved watching him paint in his studio. He made regular stuff like soup cans, pop bottles, and money look like real art. Mary Lou and Eva just loved his giant pictures of Elvis Presley. Mom, always aware of unnecessary clutter, asked, "Gee, Andy, when you going to get rid of this stuff?" Uncle Andy, startled, said, "Oh no, this is art. It's going to be worth a lot of money." Mom really didn't understand art. With all the commotion that we caused, Uncle Andy decided it might be better to put us all to work. It wasn't long before each of us had different jobs. He knew I liked to do art, so he let me help with his giant paint-by-number sailboat painting. At night, Uncle Andy went out to parties to see other famous people. In the morning, we patiently sat by his door, waiting for it to open so he could tell us all about who he had met. Once, Maddie surprised Uncle Andy by going into his room a little too early. He let out a shriek because he didn't have his wig on yet. Of course, we all knew Uncle Andy was bald, just like Dad and Uncle John. Uncle Andy had wigs for every occasion. Messy wake-up wigs, multicolored afternoon wigs, and formal wigs for parties. He had given Dad his old wigs, and back at home we had a lot of fun with them. Each day was a chance to see something new. We especially loved hiding in the studio when Uncle Andy had important art people over to talk about his work. They would all huddle around the paintings, pointing and peering. They really thought Uncle Andy was onto something. I knew his paintings were super neat, and it made me want to do my own art when I got home. Finally, Dad announced, "It's time to get on home." That night, we packed up all of our things. Again, Mary Lou and Eva made the sandwiches. Bubba added a few salamis. Uncle Andy was on his way out the door with one of his soup can paintings when I told him we had to leave in the morning. He replied, oh, really? I have to go out to sell this picture to a man waiting at the corner. You know, he's the taxicab king. He really likes my work. Then I'm going to a party. Oh, so have a fabulous trip, Jamie. Bye. We went to bed early, and before I knew it, Mom was wiggling my toes and saying, "Time to get up." Bubba helped us with our things, and we trudged out into the dark morning. At the foot of the steps, there were a bunch of boxes that Uncle Andy had left for all of us. A lot of neat stuff, including art supplies for me. Bubba drowned us with those wet kisses as we got into the car. Soon we were weaving our way downtown to go through the first tunnel. We all fell asleep wondering about our next trip back to Uncle Andy's. As we got older, we made many more trips back to that faraway city, and Dad continued bringing interesting junk from the junkyard for Uncle Andy. I really liked doing art, and I learned that art is something that is all around us all the time. In the corner of my bedroom, I made an art studio of my own, and although Mom fretted and fussed as usual over what a mess it all was, she didn't make me clean it up. She even woke me up early on Saturdays to drive me to art class. You know, I think Mom's finally understanding what art is all about. It's fun to get a little inside scoop on what it was like to have Andy Warhol as your uncle.
All right, little artists, are you ready to do an art project inspired by Mr. Andy Warhol?
All right, let's make an art piece inspired by Andy Warhol. So what you'll need for this is a Sharpie or black marker. So you can use a thick Sharpie or a thin black pen or marker. Glue stick, scissors, and I've already cut these out, but you'll use your scissors to cut out pieces of different colored tissue paper. And if you don't have tissue paper at home, you can just use crayons to color them different colors. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take your paper and you're going to draw a line vertically and then another line horizontally. And then in each square, each of the 4 squares, you're going to draw an object. And you're going to draw the same object in all 4 squares. Because remember, Andy Warhol would take the same picture and then have them printed with different colors, right? So I'm going to draw a rainbow in each of my squares. But this is your artwork, so you can draw whatever you'd like in each of your squares. All right, after you draw 4 of the exact same things, then you can put a different color tissue paper on top of each drawing. And if you want, I'm going to choose to just put 1 and I'll show you how I do that. But if you want, you can actually put a couple different colors on there. So it's really up to you how you'd like to do it. And then you're just simply going to take your glue stick, and tissue paper is very thin. So be sure to just be careful when you're putting the glue stick on there. And there you have some artwork inspired by Andy Warhol. Now, you can make 6 squares or 8 squares instead of the 4. You can do this however you want, but I can't wait to see your creative process. Remember to join us again and hit that subscribe button so you know when our next read aloud and lesson goes up. Give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed our read aloud and lesson today.